So, John, I like challenging you with opinions,
You do
some,
indeed. I always enjoy it.
sometimes provocative. So, today I want to discuss, just because it's come up recently in conversation. There was an article a couple of years ago, good couple of years ago, by Forbes, talking about the dream team for startup founders. And the dream team back in those days was listed as the hipster, the hacker, and the hustler. Are you familiar with these concepts in the article?
Well, I've certainly heard those terms used many times, not necessarily as the dream team for a startup, but it kind of makes sense.
So their argument was, the hustler is the person who sells the idea, the concept. That's the salesperson. They're the wheeler dealer, that kind of a thing. They get deals done and everything like that. The hacker, because a lot of startups require technology or build of some sort, that the hacker is the coder, the geek, the person who actually builds the thing that the hustler sells. And the hipster is the design creative person who makes it look pretty and chooses the right Pantone colors and things like that. And their argument was that even if you didn't have three people, you need one person that thinks with all three of those hats on. A creative hat, a build hat, and a sales hat type of thing. So the first question that I was going to say was, what do you think a dream team should consist of? And it is a loaded question. I have a reason for asking that.
Right. Okay. Well, let me say a few things. First of all, I think the founder, the person who comes up with their brilliant idea and wants to get started, they need to be front and center for a considerable period of time. Not doing every task, I've really stressed, but they need to be seen as the key person within the business. Now, Daniel Priestley has coined a phrase as of the key person of influence. This is a person who has the idea, they know how to pitch it, they're regularly publishing, whether it's through blogs, whether it's articles, whether it's podcasts these days. In some cases, it would be having written books, and they will be overseeing the development of products and services and ultimately developing partnerships and all those key elements. So
That
that
that's the
kind of
hustler.
person, that's kind of the hustler, I think. But he also makes an argument that's saying for any business, they need to have someone who's kind of absolutely focused on the operation. For bigger businesses, this would be the chief operating officer, but the person who is running the engine room, if you like, making sure all those key pieces are being done. But also another person, probably different, who is focused on the marketing and sales, the engine of it. Now, the hustler or the key person of influence needs to be able to deliver the pitches, to be able to talk and close the deals and so on. But having the engine that's creating the leads, that's putting out this information, that develops the website, which creates the branding, creates the schematics, all those kind of elements. So you've got like the COO, you've got the marketing stroke salesperson, and you would typically, I think, would then need someone who has kind of got that technical bent, depending on the type of business you're in, of course, but someone who can kind of create some of those different pieces and knows how to connect either the product or service and the elements within it, and how that kind of translates to being able to communicate it effectively out to different people as well. Now, as business organizations grow, they're going to be different pieces and components as well. But most businesses, until they grow to a certain size, are not going to need, for example, a dedicated finance person, dedicated HR or people person, dedicated technology person. They'll be looking to either pay for those services or have fractional resources, like maybe a CTO 1 day a week, for example. So that would be my kind of opening gambit. Most importantly, making sure that the key person of influence, the founder, the key hustler, in your language, isn't doing every single task. That's a way to kill the business in a very short order.
There's actually two things that I want to address there. The first was I'm really glad that you answered that question in that way because you absolutely pinpointed the one persona, as it were, that I immediately thought Forbes had overlooked. You called it the chief operating officer. In keeping with their terminology, I called it the hound, the person who
Yeah,
actually gets stuff done.
get stuff done. Yeah.
And I had literally mentored a young startup, and they literally had called themselves chief hustler, chief hacker, chief hipster. It was so cringe. But they, young 20-year-old, and they were like all over the place. And I went, "Where's your hound?" And they looked at me and they went, "What do you mean?" I went, "You're really great at design and concept and pretty colors and brochures and website and you're really great at coding and this thing works really well and you can sell ice to Eskimos, but nothing's happening here because you haven't got it together." One of their things that they didn't actually know was their burn rate. So they weren't keeping track of cash burn, cash flow, anything like that, because the hustler, the founder, the guy with the idea was swanning about, just selling his vision to everybody. The hipster was making it all look beautiful and having great collateral to back up the pictures and everything. The hacker was churning out code for a platform that really worked well, but they were burning through money without knowing it. They weren't getting stuff, pulling stuff together. They weren't paying their suppliers on time. They needed a hound, and the reason why I called it a hound, a dog with a bone, right? The
Yeah,
person just
absolutely.
grabs hold and just goes, right, no matter how small we are, we need process and procedure to be able to do things in a methodical fashion. So that was, I, I'm really glad that you said chief operating officer because that's exactly what it is like. So if anybody listening to this does believe that the Forbes article that the hipster, the hacker, and the hustler are the dream team, make sure you've got a hound in there as well. That would be the first thing. But one of the things that I'm going to challenge you on is you said, the founder, the key person of interest, the person who has the idea. I have come across people, founders, who have got the idea, but they don't sit in that hustler category. It could be a really introverted geek who has this stonking idea and has built this brilliant platform but hasn't a clue how to sell it. They can't articulate their vision. As a matter of fact, some of them don't even know how good the thing is that they've built because they don't understand. They built it for themselves. Instead of building it, they didn't have the mentality that this is something that could be sold. So it's also the recognition that sometimes it's not you who needs to be in the front and you do need somebody else's help.
That's a really good point. I think ultimately the founder, the person who's leading the business, can't remove themselves from that role of kind of being that sort of starting point, but they have to be very clear with themselves and with the team as they're building it of the skills that they don't have, which they need to bring in. I totally agree with you. And if there's not everyone will feel comfortable going out, and if you talk to some founders and say that they're going to need to be pitching continually, that's going to be enough for them to, turn off the lights there and then. But if they can articulate what their problem they're solving, how they're trying to solve it, the solution they're delivering, and someone else can work up the materials, can have the conversations, then absolutely that's a really strong working model as well. You've got to have that kind of marketing and sales component. It doesn't have to be directly associated with the founder. It often is in the early stages, but your point's a really good one. Where that person's temperament isn't there, there's no point trying to push it. I actually work with a number of entrepreneurs and try and help guide them around the areas which are not their strengths and saying, try not to force yourself to do things that are not your core strength or capability, but don't ignore them either. It's often the finances, something you referred to there a minute ago, either from the basics of people managing their costs and determining if they're going to be using bookkeeping capabilities and learning how to do that, or getting someone else to do it. But even if they do, they have to understand the outputs and the importance of knowing what money they have in the bank, where it's coming, where it's going out, all the kind of the basic building blocks. You could say to people, if they're going out driving and they've got a petrol or diesel car and they're not looking at the fuel gauge, that's not a good quality for a driver. You need to know that you've got enough fuel in the tank, otherwise you're going to come a cropper.
And exactly what you said about helping people understand where maybe their strengths don't lie. That specifically came up recently in a conversation with a founder who was very adamant that he wants to dispel the myth that founders are the fountain of all knowledge in the startup. Because he said there is this incredible myth that a lot of founders believe themselves, or that is within the industry, that the founder must know everything. They must be the most knowledgeable person, and the expectation is that the founder, of course, they'll know how to read term sheets, how to do share splits, how to negotiate complex contracts, what the best choice of platform is for the long term when the techie geeks make recommendations. All of these things, there's a huge amount of pressure put on the founder's shoulders by maybe shareholders, maybe even fellow founders, maybe even employees, for the founders to know everything. And this founder that I was speaking to said, I want really strongly to communicate to fellow founders that it's okay not to have all the answers. And I think that's a really crucial lesson. So the work that you're doing with helping those people understand that they mustn't even expect themselves to have all the skills necessary to fill every single gap in the business.
100% agree. And I sometimes, as you're aware, I have a property business as well, which I've built up and run for a number of years now. But I am very clear of the skills that I have and absolutely the skills that I do not have. And I am totally willing to pay for those skills. In properties, it's a lot easier to understand. If there's a complex problem with the boiler, I'm not going to try and gem up and learn how the boiler engineering elements work in my different properties. Or if there's some particular problem which needs specialist attention or electrics in the house, I will go to an expert who will advise me. I need to make the final decision and use it with the best facts and knowledge that I have, but I can kind of separate out quite easily. Often when people are setting up their own businesses, they fuse all that together and think they're either people put on them, as you say, or they just assume that they have to make decisions on everything. You may have to make the final decision on pieces, but try and surround yourself with people who have that expertise and knowledge, whether they are suppliers, whether they are people, associates with the business, or employees, depending on the size and scale of the business. Understand where your strength lies and focus and spend your time on that, but also make sure that all these other critical elements are being covered by people with equivalent types of skills and interests as well.
Excellent, Jon. Thank you very much for the chat. I'm going to stop the recording for this week.
Brilliant.